Welcome to the Battery Testing Mentor podcast. My name is Johannes, and here I discuss all topics about battery testing, battery safety, battery handling, short, on the point, and with actionable advice. Also visit www.batterytestingmentor.com and sign up there for the email update. With every episode, I send out the summary of the key points straight into your inbox so that you can make the best use of your time. Also, if you have any feedback, questions, advice, let me know. Just reply on this email, and you can directly reach me. Also, if you like the podcast, share it, give me a review. I'm happy to hear any feedback. And then we go into the episode, and today I continue with this theme of EU battery testing, battery regulation, not testing. It's all about batteries. And I am very glad that today former colleague joined me here in this episode, who is working in the battery regulation. I mix it up again, in the EU battery regulation in this topic. And he, together, we just discuss now what it is all about. And there I don't want to hold you off any further. Let's get into the interview. So today I am visited here by a very special guest, a former colleague of mine from my times at TÜV Süd. He's still there, and I don't want to tell too much about it, and let him say himself some words about his journey into TÜV Süd and how he got to the point where he is today. A very warm welcome to Christian Theeck.
Thank you, Johannes. Thank you very much. So then let me just thank you for having me here, and let me shortly introduce myself. Actually, I'm already with TÜV Süd now for more than 10 years. We were at that time working together at TÜV Süd battery testing. So this was approximately the last 7-8 years at TÜV Süd. I was also leading the company for 7 years, and so also always dealing with batteries, focus on lithium-ion battery testing. And then I changed to the more or less mother company, if you like, so TÜV Süd Product Service. And there I have a global role. So I dealing with energy services, energy-related services on a global level. So it's my objective to support all the regions here and set up new services in this regard. And one of my current focuses is the EU battery regulation. I'm the global project lead there. And content-wise, I support all the regions to grow the business. Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, this was really the big coincidence and a good connection point, because the EU battery regulation is really kind of this hot topic right now. And to have a podcast about this, where we can talk a little bit more, and not only me talking some stuff that I understood there in the regulation, is, I think, adding a lot of value to the listeners. And therefore I said, okay, let's get Christian here and let's talk about the EU battery regulation. A very fun topic, as all these dry regulations, but we will try to make it as interesting as possible. And I think it is very interesting, especially if you are active in this battery area. So maybe when we start at this very high level, I mean, the obvious question is, why do we need an EU battery regulation, and what is really the goal of such an regulation?
Actually, maybe before I'm telling about the battery regulation, I mentioned that there's already a battery directive in place on the European level. So we all have to deal with it. In Germany, it's called the Batteriegesetz. And the Batteriegesetz was mainly dealing
and mainly consumer batteries, right?
No, they were also dealing with already, of course, consumer batteries and starter SLI batteries, stuff like this. But at that time, when this battery directive was released, there was not so many batteries on the market, I would say. So it was mainly the topic, what have to be in place, that we have more or less a closed loop, that the ones who are selling batteries, that it's also got back and recycled and more or less collected separately from normal waste streams, stuff like this. And now coming to the EU battery regulation, the Commission and like the European authorities acknowledge that like the share of battery related devices or applications products increase steadily. So the battery is used more and more often to power the devices, products, cars, whatsoever. And therefore they wanted to set up a new legislation which is kind of reflecting the complexity of such a battery. So we know that the battery is like touching many parts or many like of aspects when it comes to legislation. Like on the one hand side, it's safety, it's sustainability, it's also about transparency, all that stuff. And therefore, this new battery regulation should set up requirements towards the whole life cycle of a battery with exactly this focus topics. So safety, sustainability, transparency. To, on the one hand side, to ensure safety for the end consumers, for the infrastructure, to make batteries more safe in general, then to have it more sustainable, to enlarge the life cycle of batteries, not just having the first life, for instance, as a car traction battery in an e-car, so that you also can use it a second time or a third time, for instance, as a stationary battery storage. And as well, since we all know that to produce batteries, you have a long supply chain from the raw materials, maybe from South America or wherever, then getting assembled to a battery cell, and then to a battery pack, stuff like that, then to be integrated in a car. So it's going all around the globe. So many emissions and people labor is related to the production of batteries, and therefore it should be transparent. So what is the energy consumption? Is there all this labor protection guaranteed throughout the supply chain? All that. And that should be also, this topic shall be also covered by the EU battery regulation.
And basically the EU then said, okay, we need to discuss this. We need to regulate it. We need to make a good framework for it that we kind of have all of Europe aligned. And then, I mean, we also talked beforehand about this, like before there was the battery directive, now it's a battery regulation. I mean, as it's very interesting and as you have there really a lot of insights in how this process is done, maybe let's lose some words about what is the difference between directive and regulation, and why is it kind of so important that this is now a regulation and not just a directive, basically.
Yes, very good thing, good topic. Yeah, you have to know when you're talking about a directive that the directive is more or less like done on EU level, but there needs to be a transition into national law of each EU member state. So if you like, there's more or less like a national flavor like to each law in every EU member state. So it's everywhere somehow a little bit different. And it could be also the case that some EU member states just postpone the transition into national law. And if you compare the whole European Union, you do not have this kind of equal landscape that everywhere the same rules are taking place. And that somehow changes within regulation, because regulation is uniformly entering into force in all EU member states and will become applicable, and you cannot change it. So it will be everywhere the same. And therefore, you can see that the EU Commission or the EU legislative authorities step by step changing the approach and using more and more the instrument of regulation to just guarantee the uniform legislation all across Europe, if you like.
Yeah. And therefore, like, it's really important that this regulation was published last year, in summer last year. And basically, with the publishing, it more or less enters into force. I mean, of course, there is some like deadlines when the paragraphs really need to be fulfilled, but it's not like it's published and then it's just this message to the countries to say, hey, now start implementing it. But it's more or less, that's it. It is as it is. And the challenge is really now that basically everyone who is working with batteries, right, who is selling batteries, who is producing batteries, who's recycling batteries, needs to have this in mind.
Yes, exactly. I mean, it's also a quite complex process, I would say, because in mid of last year, in July, It was adopted by the EU Parliament, this new law, and also by the EU Council, representing all the EU member states. And then, in the next step, it has to be published in the official journal of the European Union. And then it more or less enters into force with a certain transitional period. And then it turns out like it was the 17th August 2023. But at that time, like it entered into force, but also with a kind of limitation that it says that more or less the content of the EU battery regulation will enter into force 6 months later. So it was somehow entered into force, somehow not. So the first decisive date was the mid of February. But really decisive for all the stakeholders you were talking about is like the mid of August this year, because then first CE marking requirements will go live, which is new for the battery as a component.
Yeah. I mean, this is directly then the next point to talk about, like what is the status now of this regulation? Like there are already requirements that are like hard in words, in documents, in legal terms there, and you need to fulfill them, like the CE marking then for the batteries in middle of this year. But there are also a lot of requirements that are like completely undefined, where there are things that still need to be created, where the commission needs to follow up and so on. So how do you see this playing out? I mean, on the one hand, we have these requirements that need to be fulfilled now, and then there's still kind of this certain level of uncertainty, right? What will come in the next couple of years?
Yes, actually, it's a huge complex project, I would say. So I would like always to talk about the so-called Basic Act, which enters into force so far. And there are at many stages or how can I say it? In many sections of the EU battery regulation, there are like the EU battery regulation is talking about a delegating act to come or implementing act to come. What does it actually mean? It means like when delegating acts come entering into force, they have an influence on the basic act, so they further describe it. For an example is, for instance, for the product carbon footprint. Like the delegating act is then describing how is the calculation methodology, what is like the framework, where from which end to what end do you have to consider the data, stuff like this. It's like a delegating act, and it's have to be implemented for all the different battery types. It's somehow different. And also when it comes to recycled content and all these other aspects of the EU battery regulation, it's also like an instrument of the EU Commission to have learnings out of the EU battery regulation, to see how the regulation is working. Is it easy to deal with it? Is it like, gives it the certain focus to the industry which it should have, or needs there be a certain other focus, a refocus, and then the EU Commission can step in and publish another delegating act to change somehow the basic act. And there's another option, it's called Implementing Act. The Implementing Act is not influencing or changing the basic act, but is somehow showing how you should show the content of the basic act to the public, to the authorities, or somehow. So especially when it comes to Article 13, when it comes to labeling and marking, how has the certain marking and labeling requirements to be fulfilled, on your battery design. So, and this is then described by an implementing act. So in the end, we see it will come many, many more in the future. We cannot exactly say how will the battery regulation look like in the next 5 years. So they could be subject to change. And it's a really complex project because has tackled so many different aspects of a battery and so many different industrial sectors with so many different kind of, basic conditions that it's really tough to have it all unioned under one roof, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Like, do you think this really will play out in the timeline that is foreseen in the battery regulation? Like, there is basically you could almost say every year another of these paragraphs or parts enters into force. And this goes until, I think, 2035 or so, where then the last changes enter into force. And a lot of this, as you said, depends on these acts, these delegated acts, these implementing acts. Do you think this will work out as scheduled, or will there be delays and kind of we are not yet sure what will really be the case?
Actually, I assume that the deadlines are more or less floating. That's also foreseen in the EU battery regulation. So you have on the one hand side a certain due date when it will enter into force, but on the other hand, it says a certain period, transitional period of 18 months, 12 months, whatsoever, after publishing the delegating act. So the EU Commission was somehow smart to implement this kind of floating deadline mechanism already into the EU battery regulation that, there is no really showstopper, for the battery regulation itself as a legislative aspect.
Yeah.
So
as a
also,
whole, it will always be valid. Maybe
exactly.
some stuff will be delayed, some stuff will be changed.
Exactly. And there is one big thing. It's also 2025. It's notified body related. It's the due diligence policies of batteries. It's dealing with the supply chains, that you have to have a transparency over your supply chain, and you have to be able to identify risks in your supply chain. You have to implement measures if you identify risk, and then of course you have to make sure that these risks cannot occur again somehow. It's entering 2025. It's just around the corner. You need so-called notified bodies to assess the companies that they, have the job done properly. But that somehow is a very challenging task. But also here, the EU battery regulation or the Commission was quite smart, because they distinguished or separated the requirements towards several articles. So, they are separated from each other. So the article will be in place, and the article with the notified body is another one. So when there's no notified body, okay, then just this article will not be valid, but all the other ones you have to stick to.
Yeah. And especially with these notified bodies, right? Like in some countries, there's not even decided how a notified body can be, or how a body can be notified, basically, right?
Yes.
And then the customer or the battery manufacturer cannot go anywhere.
Actually, there are some possibilities. It depends. Now, just last week, the first notifying authorities were announced across Europe. So we have now first notifying authorities in Finland, in Sweden, Estonia, Lithuania, I guess. So, but I mean, for all the others, we still wait. But now everybody is more or less like seeking for or evaluating opportunities how, as a future notified body can make use of this notifying authorities if possible. But of course, you have to have a so-called certification company in place there, because only national notification is possible. And then somehow the setup has to work. If you are not there, if you are not present as a company in these countries, then you have to wait, of course, until the notifying authority is available in your country as well.
Yeah. And now if we change the side, basically we have the stakeholders who are affected. And basically before we go into the stakeholders, we also talked about, which batteries are affected. And basically, I would say any battery that is brought to the market in Europe, like that is sold, is in one way or the other affected. Right? Like there is no easy way out.
Exactly. There's no way out. There are just 3 exemptions, actually. One is defense, the other one is space, and the third one is nuclear.
Yeah.
So these are just the 3 exemptions.
The important industries.
Yes, exactly. And for all the other, it doesn't matter if we just talk about the battery itself or we talk about like the product with the incorporated battery. So the manufacturer in this regard is applicable towards the requirements of the EU battery regulation. That's true.
Yeah. And I mean, what is also interesting, there are these different between like the economic operator and the producer, and kind of, I mean, in the end, basically everyone who touches a battery on the way from production to to being on the market, being used, is somehow affected by this regulation. It's not that you can just say, hey, I don't know, the CATL, LG, Samsung, Panasonics of this world, they produce the battery, they are the ones responsible. But basically, whoever is in this chain has to carry a burden or has to carry his share in the regulation, not necessarily a burden, or hopefully it will not be a burden. This we will see. But yeah, right. So basically, maybe we go through these stakeholders a little bit.
Johannes, maybe before we go to the stakeholders, it's easier to describe the task of a stakeholder when we beforehand just have a rough look to the battery types, which are distinguished with regards to battery regulation. Just to briefly introduce these types, we have the EV batteries, like, provide traction to EVs and plug-in hybrids, stuff like that. Then we have the LMT batteries, like the light means of transport batteries, represented by scooters or e-bikes. Then we have the big group of industrial batteries. It's very somehow confusing for people, because the industrial batteries are like an umbrella group for batteries, which are not belonging to any other group. And especially when we talk about traction batteries, which are implemented in, construction machinery, or implemented in like flying taxis, in like ATVs, all stuff like this, they are all belonging not to the EV batteries, they're belonging to the industrial batteries. So it's a very huge group. Industrial batteries, they have it like a characteristic that they are designed for industrial use, that they're not belonging to any other group. And also the stationary battery energy storage system belongs to them, like, storing and releasing energy to the grid or to the end consumer, whatever is required. Huge group. And then we have the SLI batteries. SLI batteries are like the auxiliary power storage units in the car for starting, lighting, ignition, or auxiliary purposes. And then we have the portable ones, like the portable batteries represented by power tools, for instance, like smaller batteries. And then we have the portable batteries for general use, which you have in your remote controller, for instance, like the small cylindrical cells or coin cells whatsoever, medical devices, stuff like that. And actually, this is a very good context now to talk about the stakeholders, because there we mainly distinguish two parties, if you like. So on the left-hand side, or if you have it in mind, so on the one hand side, we have the producers, and how to explain the role of producers properly. I'd like to use an example. For instance, you are an OEM and you like to place an e-car on the market, and then you have many batteries in your car. Let's take an example. We talk about the EV battery, like the traction battery. You designed it yourself, you manufacture it yourself, or you have it manufactured, but you implement it integrate it in your car, and then you sell it. In this regard, you are, as a producer, you are seen as a manufacturer with regards to the EU battery regulation. So you have to fulfill all the obligations which are applicable to a manufacturer. When we are talking about, for instance, like an SLI battery, which we also talked about, the smaller battery, mainly lead acid based, for starting, ignition, stuff like this, for these jobs, you very often just buy it off the shelf, what is available on the market, and you just import it from another country, mainly from Asia or US, I don't know. And in this regard, the OEM regarding this battery, he is acting as an importer. So in this regard, he has to fulfill the obligations which are applicable to an importer. So that I wanted to visualize that a producer has many faces, this like of term, and they're related to many, many different kind of obligation sets depending on the battery we are talking about. And on the other hand side, we are talking about so-called economic operators. What is different about them? Economic operators are not like the producer, having like a new product placed first time on the European market on a commercial basis, all that stuff. The economic operators are more or less different. I like to use in this regard the example of, for instance, you are like a grid operator and you purchase some battery energy storage system, to enlarge your grid capacity, grid performance, doing peak shaving, stuff like this. And in this regard, you just put the batteries into service for your own purpose. But nevertheless, in this regard, you do not even place them on the market for end use for any other party. You just use it for yourself. But even then, you have to deal with like the requirements of the EU battery regulation. And same is applicable to economic operators who like to repurpose batteries. So the guys who likes to extend the life cycle of a battery to second or third life, for instance, extract the battery from a car and then use it for another purpose, then they are also an economic operator, but also be dealing with obligations out of the EU battery regulation.
Yeah, so basically we see it is not super easy. It's not a super straightforward thing where you have I don't know, 5 pages of regulation and you know exactly who needs to go through them and work with them. But basically everyone who is touching batteries is called to the table and needs to take care of his part of this regulation. And that really makes it complex, I would say. And yeah, therefore there is of course a lot of questions right now how to realize this, how to fulfill this regulation. Yeah, with this I would say we make a break and reconvene here in the next episode to continue and then talking more into details about the battery regulation. There is still a lot to come. Probably it's as much that we can't even cover everything in another episode, but we will try our best next time.
Yes. Thank you, Johannes. Let's do it.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you.
That was the first part of the interview with Christian Theeck. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you had some insights. The second part is coming up in the next episode. Until then, I leave you with this. Let me still know any questions you have, and I wish you a good time until the next part.